So I'll present the most important outcomes of my research today. It's a very small-scale research, but I believe I found some interesting things. Can I move this? So first I will start with a recent example of this anti-Islam discourse, which was visible in the Dutch public debate after the terror attacks on the office of Charlie Hebdo. In Dutch newspapers and magazines, many cartoons were published as a tribute to the murdered journalist, emphasizing the power of the freedom of expression, as opposed, which is described as one of the most important values of Dutch society, as opposed to the violence of others, specifically Muslims. And this led to the simplistic discourse of Islam versus free speech, which emphasizes that the two were incompatible. And the result of this discourse is not only that Muslims and Islam are being associated with violence and extremism, but also with self-victimization and passivity. In the aftermath of the attacks, we could see, as well as around the debate of ISIS, that Muslims have been publicly accused for not distancing themselves actively from Islamic extremism, as well as not taking action to become active members of society. And this research aims to counter dominant perceptions by providing insights in a distinct group of Dutch Muslim youth bloggers who believe that their pen, meaning their voices and narratives, is the most effective tool in challenging the dominant status quo on Muslims in the Netherlands. So the structure of the presentation is as follows. First I will discuss briefly the Dutch public debate on Muslims and Islam, as well as the responses of Dutch Muslim youth to the dominant discourse. Then I will discuss shortly the theory on the public square, as well as my methodology. And at last the results, which can be divided into two parts: the narrative that these bloggers create, as well as the platform that they occupy. So, Muslims and Islam have become the center of attention in the Dutch public debate on integration during the 1990s and early 2000s. And this was after several global and national events took place, such as the Russia affair, 9/11, the murder of filmmaker Theo van Gogh, and the rise of populist politicians Pim Fortuyn and Geert Wilders. And these events resulted in the unprecedented polarization of the debate and full perceptions of an unbridgeable gap between immigrant Muslims and native Dutch. Islam is increasingly seen as incompatible with Dutch culture and values, and Muslims have been pressured to become Dutch by internalizing these values, while distancing themselves from their own culture. Well, to give you some statistics, after 9/11, 95% expressed to have a negative view of Muslims, of the Dutch majority population, and 85% argued that Muslims were not integrated enough into Dutch society. And these feelings of discontent were mirrored by the Muslims. 58% of the Muslims felt not welcome in the Netherlands, and this was a poll in 2003. And 69% estimated that they would always remain an outsider regardless of their efforts to integrate. So as a result of these negative attitudes, Muslims and Islam are routinely stigmatized, stereotyped, and essentialized in the Dutch public sphere. And the media is crucially implicated in producing as well as reflecting the dominant discourse. For example, Muslim individuals are, in media images, held accountable for the behavior of other Muslims, and their loyalty towards Dutch society and its core values is constantly doubted. Moreover, Islam is often portrayed as other and alien, and very rarely as a legitimate and personal belief. So this continuous stigmatization has impacted Dutch Muslims' ability to participate or define themselves on their own terms in the Dutch public sphere. And as a response to this, an increasing number of Dutch Muslim youth have turned to online platforms as alternative spaces to challenge dominant assumptions in the past 10 to 15 years. And my research explores a distinct group of Dutch Muslim youth bloggers, which I will explain later, and the ways they challenge the dominant anti-Islam discourse. So to get a better understanding of the online platform central in this research and their place within the larger Dutch public sphere, it is first useful to conceptualize the notion of the public sphere. So Habermas, who is the main theorist of the public sphere, argues that the public sphere is the place where private people come together as a public to discuss matters of public concern, and this space is open and accessible to all citizens, according to him. However, his arguments have been challenged by several contemporary theorists who argue that this definition of the single bourgeois public sphere is not open and accessible for all, since access to it is determined by status and many are denied access based on gender, race and class. This results in marginalized groups having a disadvantage in their ability to participate equally in the public sphere. And these theories have therefore made a case for multiple coexisting counterpublics composed of marginalized groups. And these counterpublics are separate discursive arenas distinct from the dominant public and seek to correct the exclusions of the dominant public by creating counter-discourses that emphasize race, gender and ethnic differences. So these publics can be free of the supervision of dominant groups and thus find their own voice or words to express their feelings and thoughts. And in this research, a distinction is made between the dominant Dutch public and the online counter-public established by Muslim bloggers. So inspired by the concept of counter-publics, various new media scholars have argued that the internet is an excellent space for the construction of counter-public spheres as site for the production and circulation of counter-discourses. And several studies have been dedicated in recent years to Dutch Muslim youth establishing online counter-publics. And although they emphasize different target groups and motivation, they all have in common that the examined online platforms have an inward orientation, focusing mainly on processes of identity formation and community building. So these online platforms form a close community of Muslim contributors and readers, often with an ethnic signature, and mainly focus on those who share their beliefs. And since they lack an outward orientation, the engagement of these platforms with the dominant public and their influence on existing power structures has received little attention in current scholarship. And it's therefore interesting to take a closer look at how online platforms created by marginalized Muslim youth challenge their exclusion from the dominant public exactly by engaging with it. So in my choice of this specific group of Muslim bloggers with an outward orientation, I got inspired by the work of Eckert and Chatham, who studied the phenomenon of German Muslim bloggers as an emerging counterpublic. And they argue that the group of bloggers they examined is public in their orientation, as opposed to the more theologically orientated Salafist Muslim bloggers, which is another significant group of Muslim bloggers in Germany as well as in the Netherlands. And to further define Dutch Muslim public youth bloggers, I have set up a list of selection criteria. And these criteria include that bloggers who write on a wide range of social, political, cultural and media issues, who address a Muslim as well as non-Muslim native Dutch audience, and who represent a response to the exclusion and stigmatization of Muslims in the public sphere. Furthermore, I focused on the age group of 18 till 40, which broadly defines youth and corresponds with existing studies on Dutch Muslim youth in the Netherlands. And I selected 3 collective blog platforms consisting of several bloggers with a Muslim and/or ethnic minority background. And these are Wij blijven hier, which stands for We Remain Here, Voorbeeld Allochtoon, which stands for Exemplary Immigrant, and Nieuwe Moskee, which means New Mosque. And the common objective of these 3 platforms is twofold. First, they aim to challenge the misrepresentations of Muslims and ethnic minorities in the dominant public. And second, they provide a platform for young writers with a Muslim or ethnic minority background as a response to the exclusion of these groups in the dominant public. So, to give you an example, this is the homepage of Wij blijven hier. Wij blijven hier is of the 3 platforms, as far as I'm aware, the most popular. A blog in providing a response to the anti-Islam discourse. It was established in 2005, and according to the former editor-in-chief, with whom I had a telephone interview last year, the website has an average view page of around 15,000 unique clicks per day. And he argued that this is still marginal compared to other large media platforms. However, it's by far the largest online platform in the Netherlands written by Muslims for a non-Muslim and Muslim audience. And he said that a lot of other news media use the site to get information from, since it's the only one in its kind. And they have around 30 bloggers who write on a regular basis. So I chose for the method of in-depth interviewing and not textual analysis. And the motivation to conduct in-depth interviews is to let the youth speak for themselves and to capture processes such as experiences, thoughts, perceptions and feelings, and to learn more about their motivations and goals. And due to the political sensitivity of the subject and the fact that participation in interviews requires relationships with trust and also the amount of time that I had, I was able to find 4 bloggers who were willing to cooperate. As the study is exploratory in nature, aiming to provide an insight in the work of Dutch Muslim youth bloggers by highlighting the diversity of their personal stories, they are not treated as representatives for all Muslim bloggers or for Dutch Muslim youth in the Netherlands. So I interviewed 2 women and 2 men between 24 and 39 years old, living in bigger cities in the western part of the country. They are all university graduates and have diverse ethnic backgrounds, and they write for at least one of the 3 platforms. So the first part of the results is the narrative that these bloggers create. And before I go into what their main work is, I will first talk a little bit more about their motivation to start blogging. So the respondents underscored that the main reason to blog is a certain frustration of how Muslims and Islam are represented in the dominant public. They argued that the negative and essentialist portrayal of Muslim provides an image in which they do not recognize themselves. Moreover, they highlighted the presence of double standards in media coverage, as they feel that different sets of principles are applied in similar situations. And they mentioned this as partly to do with the lack of journalists and editors with a Muslim or ethnic minority background, and criticized the fact that while Muslims are often being represented by others, they rarely get the chance to represent themselves. It is therefore that the bloggers underscored the importance of alternative counterpublics, such as blogs. And in order to contribute to a fair representation of Muslims and Islam, the bloggers expressed creating counter-discourses as the fundamental focus of their work. And the interviews revealed that the counter-discourses these bloggers create can be divided in 3 distinct themes. The first one is expressing a multifaceted identity. The second is articulating own experiences. And the third is the use of humor and sarcasm. And I will discuss each one of them. So the first theme expressed by them was that blogging enables them to define their identity on their own terms without interference or oppression. For instance, whereas it has become common to speak of Muslims as a singular ethnic religious category, the respondents argued that the platforms enable Muslim bloggers to articulate the diversity of their Muslim identity and to emphasize their individuality as Muslims, as opposed to the fact that Muslims are often perceived as one group. And this is a quote of one of the respondents that emphasizes this. Additionally, they argued that blogging provided them the opportunity to express their multiple identities, to show that there is more than only their Muslim identity. One respondent, for example, which you will also see in this quote, explained that blogging enables her to challenge the dominant view of Muslims as the other, by exemplifying that although she is a Muslim, she might not be so different as people may think. And she hopes that by reading her articles, people might think that she can have very much in common with someone who adheres to a completely different religion or even an atheist. And some of the interviews also said that the blog platforms can be a space where Muslims could be normalized, as they could present themselves as people with many different interests and needs, and by expressing their opinions on issues ranging from society and politics to art, literature and religion. And so this first counter-discourse points out both the inward and outward orientation of the blog platforms. So on the one hand, they argue that blogging offers them the opportunity to engage in the process of self-identification that is denied to them as part of a marginalized group in the dominant public. And on the other hand, as they are aware of the outward orientation of the blog platforms, they strategically formulate their writings as to counter dominant assumptions about Muslims. So a second theme expressed by the respondents is that they try to challenge the misrepresentations of Muslims in the public debate by telling their personal stories. And by doing this, they claim the right to speak about Muslims based on their own experiences and try to show an image that is different than the dominant view. For example, when a reader sees something in the news about Muslims in which they do not recognize themselves as Muslims, or which they do not see in their personal environment, They can use examples of themselves or family or friends in their writings to counter these perceptions. And the following quote is of one of the respondents who argues that writing about personal experiences is the major contribution of Dutch Muslim youth bloggers to the public debate. So with regards to the public statements of politicians and other prominent figures, the bloggers mentioned the use of humor and sarcasm as a powerful strategy to mock and highlight the issue of double standards. And this can be seen as the third counter discourse. And this is often done in combination with what one of the respondents called reverse racism, used as a writing technique in response to articles or debates wherein stigmatizing and simplistic terms such as Muslims, Moroccans, or immigrants, are used or misused in specific contexts. And the bloggers then write an article that is similar in structure and argumentation, replacing the misused terms, for example, with Dutch, Europeans, and the West. And the respondents express using this strategy, for example, in response to the opinion that Muslims should publicly distance themselves from Islamic extremism, which dominated the Dutch public debate in 2014 after the rise of ISIS. And one of the bloggers, for example, published an article meant as a letter to a Dutch minister, stressing he should take his responsibility for the action of others in response to this minister's call on Muslims to publicly distance themselves. And this is the quote he says about it. And they argued that this style of writing is often much more effective than criticizing someone's expression seriously. And they said that by making these ridiculous comparisons, people seem to finally realize the issue of double standards. And they consider this strategy of reverse racism trend as they notice an increase in this type of articles, as well as the popularity it receives online, and the fact that these kind of articles often get published in major daily newspapers. So the second part of their work is the platform that they occupy. And the bloggers believe that emphasizing misrepresentations and providing oppositional counter-discourses alone do not pose a challenge to the existing power relations. And they said that these have to be combined with a critical engagement with society and the dominant media. The research shows that such engagement represents a significant dimension of their work. And they underscored they wanted to avoid being an enclave and instead reach out to a wider audience of Dutch readers, as this following quote makes clear. So she says that when it is about these topics as discrimination, framing, and representation, then you need to reach another audience than people near to that will probably think the same about it. So the respondents argued that they noticed that other media, online as well as print, increasingly see platforms as wij blijven hier as an influential source. And this has resulted in an increase of requests by established media, mainly newspapers and magazines, to publish articles written by bloggers connected to the platform. And all of the respondents have had several of their blog articles published in daily national newspapers in the last year. And they thought this is because the established media increasingly value Muslim voices on issues relating to Muslims and Islam. And they said that they really saw a change compared to the years before. In the interviews, they also talked about participation in the dominant media. For example, through a job at one of the established media, but they all agreed that this was not yet the time for them. And they said that the existence of counterpublics is of fundamental importance as long as they have the feeling not being able to define themselves on their own terms in the Dutch public, as well as not being fully accepted to it. And they argued hoping to eventually establish a broader bottom-up movement consisting of all kinds of people, not only Muslims, to be able to actually interfere in the dominant public. However, now as they still perceive themselves as vulnerable, they stated that the most effective way to exert pressure on the dominant public is a mainly one-sided process, directed from the online counterpublics towards the dominant public. So to conclude, the bloggers believe that their practices contribute to challenging and influencing the dominant discourse. And we argue that the practices of Dutch Muslim youth bloggers combine a simultaneous process of contestation and engagement. And as I said, this research is exploratory in nature, providing an insight in this distinct group of bloggers by elaborating on their personal stories. And I believe that further research could be dedicated to the challenges counterpublics of Muslim youth in the Netherlands pose on existing power structures.